Before Iran became the nation we know today, it was Persia, a land of ancient empires, legendary poets, and groundbreaking scientists. For thousands of years, this civilization was a beacon of culture and power. From Cyrus the Great's vast Achaemenid Empire to the intellectual golden age under the Abbasids, its story is one of constant evolution, but no change was as profound as the one that reshaped its very identity in the 20th century. How did this ancient monarchy transform into an Islamic Republic? The answer lies in a complex story of faith, power, and revolution. Let's rewind to the 16th century. A powerful dynasty called the Safavids came to power. They made a decision that would forever alter the course of the region. They declared Shia Islam the state religion. Before this, the area was predominantly Sunni, like much of the Muslim world. This move created a distinct religious and cultural identity for Persia, setting it apart from its neighbors, like the powerful Ottoman Empire. This Shia identity became deeply woven into the fabric of society, and the clergy, the religious scholars, gained significant influence over the people and even over politics. This foundation is crucial to understanding everything that came later. Fast forward to the 20th century, the world was changing rapidly, and Iran was no exception. Under the rule of Mohammad Reza Shah, the last king of Iran, the country embarked on an ambitious journey of modernization. In the 1960s, he launched what was called the White Revolution. This wasn't a revolution of guns and protests, but a revolution from the top down. The plan was to rapidly westernize and industrialize Iran. Land was redistributed, factories were built, women were granted the right to vote, and education was expanded. On the surface, Iran was transforming into a modern, secular state. Tehran's streets looked more and more like those in European capitals, with modern cars, Western fashion, and a burgeoning new middle class enjoying new opportunities. However, beneath this glossy surface, deep-seated tensions were simmering. The Shah's reforms were a direct challenge to the traditional conservative segments of society, especially the powerful Shia clergy. They saw this rapid westernization as an attack on Islamic values, a corrupting influence from the West that threatened the soul of the nation. They felt their authority and influence, which had been built over centuries, were being deliberately eroded. At the same time, the Shah's rule was becoming increasingly autocratic. While he was creating a new, educated middle class, he wasn't giving them any political freedom. A secret police force known as Savak ruthlessly suppressed any form of dissent. Political parties were banned, newspapers were censored, and critics of the regime were often imprisoned or worse. So you had this strange situation. The very people who benefited from the Shah's economic reforms, the engineers, the teachers, the doctors, felt alienated and disenfranchised. They wanted more than just economic prosperity. They wanted a voice in their country's future. This created a powerful and unlikely alliance. The traditional religious masses and the modern educated middle class both united against the Shah, but for very different reasons. Into this volatile mix stepped a figure who would channel this widespread discontent into a revolutionary force, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini was a senior Shia cleric, a charismatic and uncompromising critic of the Shah. He openly condemned the White Revolution, the close ties with the United States, and what he saw as the moral decay of the nation. His fiery sermons resonated deeply with millions of Iranians who felt left behind or morally offended by the Shah's policies. In 1963, his vocal opposition led to massive protests, which were brutally suppressed by the government. The following year, in 1964, the Shah had enough. Khomeini was arrested and forced into exile. He first went to Turkey, then to Iraq, and finally to a small town near Paris, France. But exile didn't silence him. In fact, it turned him into a martyr, and a global symbol of resistance. From thousands of miles away, his message was more powerful than ever. His sermons were smuggled into Iran on cassette tapes, passed from hand to hand, and played in mosques and homes across the country. These tapes became the lifeblood of the opposition movement. He spoke of social justice, independence from foreign powers, and a return to true Islamic principles. For a growing number of Iranians, Khomeini wasn't just a cleric, he was the leader of a revolution in waiting. By the late 1970s, the situation in Iran had reached a boiling point. Economic problems, combined with the ongoing political repression, fueled massive strikes and demonstrations. The country was grinding to a halt. Millions of people, from all walks of life, took to the streets, chanting slogans against the Shah and in support of Khomeini. The Shah's military, once seen as an unbreakable pillar of his power, began to crack under the pressure, with soldiers refusing to fire on their own people. Seeing his grip on power completely collapse, the Shah fled Iran in January 1979, never to return. The path was now clear. On February 1st, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini's plane touched down in Tehran. The scene was incredible. Millions of people, some estimates say up to 5 million, flooded the streets to welcome him home after 14 years in exile. It was one of the largest gatherings in human history. The energy was electric. It was the culmination of years of struggle and sacrifice. Within days, the last remnants of the Shah's government crumbled and the military declared its neutrality. The 2,500-year-old monarchy in Persia was officially over. The revolution had succeeded, but the question was, what would replace it? The answer came quickly. Khomeini and his followers moved swiftly to consolidate power. Just 2 months later, in April 1979, a referendum was held. Iranians were asked a simple question: did they want an Islamic Republic? Over 98% of the voters said yes. This marked the birth of the Islamic Republic of Iran. A new constitution was written, establishing a unique political system, a theocracy blended with elements of democracy. At the very top of this new structure was the position of the supreme leader, a powerful cleric with the final say on all state matters. And the first person to hold this title was, of course, Ayatollah Khomeini. The new government immediately began implementing a system based on its interpretation of Islamic law, or Sharia. This had a profound impact on every aspect of life. Laws were changed, the legal and educational systems were overhauled, and strict social codes, particularly for women, were enforced. The relationship with the West, especially the United States, once Iran's closest ally, was completely severed, famously leading to the Iran hostage crisis later that year. The transformation was absolute. Iran had turned from a Western-allied monarchy into a fiercely independent theocracy, defined by its Shia Islamic identity and its revolutionary principles. It's a story that shows how deep-rooted faith, a desire for political freedom, and the leadership of one determined figure can completely reshape the destiny of a nation. The philosophical underpinning of all these rituals of devotion is a theology of obedience that the Islamic Republic has developed and institutionalized over 4 decades. This theology draws on multiple sources: Quranic injunctions to obey those in authority, Shia doctrines of the Imam's authority, Persian traditions of sacred kingship, and the specific political theology of Velayat-e, and weaves them into a comprehensive framework that demands not merely outward compliance, but inward, willing, spiritually motivated submission. The key Quranic verse always invoked in this context is from Surah An-Nisa. O you who believe, obey God and obey the Messenger and those in authority among you. Islamic jurisprudence has always had to grapple with the question of who counts as a legitimate authority deserving obedience. The Islamic Republic's answer is unambiguous. The supreme leader, as the faqih who exercises the hidden imam's authority is the ultimate earthly authority whose obedience is religiously obligatory. Khomeini developed this logic with considerable sophistication. In his theory, the faqih's authority during the occultation of the hidden imam is absolute, not merely advisory or limited to specifically religious matters, but comprehensive authority over all aspects of Muslim society. He argued that the Prophet Muhammad himself combined religious and political authority, and that the hidden imam would exercise the same comprehensive authority when he returned. In the interim, the faqih must exercise this same comprehensive authority to ensure the Muslim community does not fall into corruption and oppression. This is why the supreme leader's authority in Iran extends over not only religious, but political, military, economic, and cultural matters. He is not a pope limited to the spiritual sphere. He is a ruler in the fullest sense, but a ruler whose power is understood as delegated from the divine, transmitted through the chain of sacred authority from God to the Prophet to the imams to the faqih. To question his authority is not merely political dissent. It is, in the framework of the Islamic Republic's theology, a form of apostasy. The practical consequences of this theology for Iranian political culture are profound. Political opposition, in a normal democratic sense, is not merely inconvenient for the regime. It is conceptually delegitimized by the theological framework. If the supreme leader's authority comes from God, then organized opposition to it is opposition to God's order. This is why political dissidents in Iran are typically prosecuted not just for political crimes,